The evening had settled in a calm, almost quiet way. The small venue was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. A few tables were scattered around the room, each with a candle flickering gently, casting warm light on the faces of the people gathered. There was a piano on the stage, polished and gleaming under the soft spotlight, and the regular pianist was tuning it for the night's performance. The audience was waiting for a night of familiar music, some chatting, some watching, some scrolling quietly on their phones. Through the entrance, a young man stepped in, carrying a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. His clothes were simple, nothing flashy, and his shoes had a hint of dust on them, as if he had walked a long way to get here. He paused for a moment near the doorway, looking around, taking in the scene. There was a mix of curiosity and hesitation in his eyes. He had dreamed about this moment for a long time, yet now that it had arrived, a nervous weight seemed to settle over his shoulders. He walked slowly toward the stage, weaving through the tables. He could feel the eyes of a few early guests on him, glancing with mild curiosity. He took a deep breath and approached the pianist, who was checking the tuning of the piano keys. The young man's hands fidgeted at his sides, and he cleared his throat before speaking. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but steady. "I was wondering if I could play just once tonight. I've always wanted to, and I'll only need a moment." The pianist looked up, slightly surprised. He raised an eyebrow, studying the young man's expression. There was something earnest there, something different from the casual people who sometimes asked to touch the piano. He shook his head slightly, then gestured toward the keys. "Just once?" the pianist asked, a hint of caution in his tone. "You understand this is a professional setting. People are expecting a performance." "Yes," the young man said quickly, almost nervously. "I just need one chance. I promise I won't ruin anything. I want to try." The pianist studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, one chance, but just one. Keep it short and make it count." A small murmur ran through the nearby audience, as people began to notice the young man standing by the piano. Some looked amused, thinking this might be a funny little interruption. Others were skeptical, wondering who this stranger was and why he was being given the opportunity. A few leaned in, curiosity piqued, sensing something different in his demeanor. The young man stepped up to the piano, his heart racing. He pulled a small cloth from his pocket and wiped the keys gently, as if preparing for a sacred ritual. His hands trembled slightly, but he tried to steady them, placing them carefully on the keys. The audience watched in silence now, the initial whispers fading as anticipation took over. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingers. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting for what was about to unfold. The first notes he played were soft, almost hesitant, like a question being asked. They weren't perfect, not yet, but there was a sincerity in them that drew the listeners in. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, drawn by the earnestness of the young man's approach. There was a sense of anticipation, as if everyone present knew that something unusual might happen. The pianist watched closely, a mixture of curiosity and respect forming on his face. He had seen many talented people, but there was a raw honesty in this young man's attempt that couldn't be ignored. The young man continued, letting the music flow from his fingers slowly at first, testing the waters, feeling the space around him. His nervousness was still there, but it was giving way to concentration. He let his mind focus only on the piano, on the story he wanted to tell through it. The room seemed to fade away, the audience blending into a soft background as he became absorbed in the moment. A few people began to smile, noticing the care and effort in each note. The initial skepticism started to soften, replaced by a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be more than a simple interruption. Some people even held their breath, sensing the possibility of something extraordinary emerging from this humble beginning. As he continued to play, his confidence grew slightly, and the music began to take shape. The first hesitant notes merged into a simple, flowing melody. It was not complex, but it carried emotion, a story that words could not capture. The young man's hands moved with growing assurance, and the audience began to feel the music rather than just hear it. Each chord seemed to connect with something deep within, creating a shared moment between the player and those listening. The pianist who had allowed this brief chance watched intently, recognizing the passion in the young man's performance. There was something familiar in the way he approached the keys, a raw, untamed talent that had yet to be refined, but that was full of potential. It reminded the pianist of why he loved music in the first place, for moments like this, where the heart spoke louder than technique. The young man played on, lost in the music. The nervous energy that had gripped him when he first arrived was slowly transforming into a quiet determination. He made small mistakes, of course, but he didn't let them stop him. Each stumble became part of the music, adding character and authenticity to the performance. People began to notice not just his skill, but his courage, the bravery it took to step forward and play when so many doubted him. The room was quiet now, filled with the soft sound of the piano and the occasional shuffle of a listener settling into their chair. The young man felt a sense of calmness, a surprising clarity that came from focusing solely on the keys and the melody he wanted to share. He knew this might be his only chance, but he wanted it to be meaningful. He wanted to leave an impression, however small, that this brief moment of courage could matter. As the final notes of his simple melody lingered in the air, he lifted his hands from the keys, unsure of what would come next. The room remained silent for a heartbeat longer, everyone processing what they had just heard. There was no immediate applause, only a sense of wonder, as if the audience collectively realized they had witnessed the beginning of something special. The pianist smiled and nodded at him, acknowledging not just the music, but the effort, the courage, and the heart behind it. The young man stepped back from the piano, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and anticipation. He had taken his first step, and though the journey was far from over, he had proven something to himself and to everyone watching. He had dared to ask for one opportunity, and in doing so had created a moment that could not be taken away from him. The audience, slowly realizing what they had experienced, began to applaud softly at first, then louder as the realization sank in. Some people were smiling, some had tears in their eyes, and some simply sat in quiet admiration. The young man felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling that went beyond any words. He had played from his heart, and that was all that mattered. As the applause continued, he allowed himself a small, humble bow. The pianist approached and patted him on the shoulder, a silent gesture of approval and encouragement. The young man nodded, thanking him quietly, and then stepped back toward the edge of the stage, blending once again into the background of the evening. But inside, he knew that this night, this small chance, was the beginning of something that could change his life forever. The young man took a deep breath as he returned to the piano, the soft applause from the audience still echoing in his ears. He had been allowed one chance, and he knew this moment was important. The first part of his performance had been simple, almost cautious, but it had given him confidence. He sat down again, placing his hands lightly on the keys, feeling their cool, smooth surface. The room had quieted now, and even the small murmurs from the tables seemed to have disappeared. Everyone's attention was focused on him. He could feel the weight of it, and it made his heart beat faster, but he let it strengthen his resolve instead of frightening him. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, and he closed his eyes. He could hear the faint hum of the room, the clinking of glasses, and the soft rustle of the audience shifting in their seats. He took another deep breath and let his hands move. The first notes were cautious, delicate, like the beginnings of a story being told. They weren't fast or complicated, just a gentle flow that drew people in without overwhelming them. He felt the rhythm start to settle into him, and with each note, his confidence grew a little more. The audience began to notice the change. The music had a feeling to it, a warmth that wasn't just in the sound but in the way it was played. Some people leaned forward, their expressions softening as they listened. The skeptical whispers that had been there when he first arrived had mostly faded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. There was a sense of anticipation in the room, as if everyone knew that something unexpected was happening. He continued playing, letting the music grow naturally. The melody started simple, but it began to shift as his hands moved more freely across the keys. He allowed himself to add little flourishes here and there, tiny bursts of emotion that reflected what he was feeling. With each chord, he poured a bit more of himself into the music, not worrying about perfection, but about connection. He wanted the audience to feel what he felt, and he wanted to prove to himself that he could do more than just play notes on a page. At first, there were a few mistakes, small slips that made him pause for a fraction of a second. But instead of letting them disrupt his flow, he used them to shape the music. He turned each mistake into a softer note, a gentle transition that kept the melody alive. The audience barely noticed the errors, focused instead on the story unfolding through his fingers. There was something human in it, something real that made the performance more powerful than any flawless recital could have been. He began to add more complexity, letting his emotions guide the tempo. The melody grew richer, moving from soft, delicate notes to more resonant, fuller chords. His fingers moved with greater confidence now, pressing down on the keys with purpose and precision. The music filled the room, carrying a sense of hope, longing, and quiet joy. People could feel it in their hearts, even if they couldn't describe it in words. The young man had managed to transform the piano into a voice for the emotions he had kept inside for so long. Some of the audience members were visibly moved. One woman had tears forming in her eyes, quietly brushed away with the back of her hand. A man at a table leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, lost in thought, feeling memories stir from long ago. The young man didn't notice them individually. He was completely absorbed in the music, yet the connection he was creating with the room was undeniable. Every note was an invitation for them to feel something, to share in the story he was telling. He began to play a more intricate section, one that required more skill and control. His hands moved quickly but smoothly, each finger finding its place with certainty. The notes flowed together in a way that sounded natural, effortless even, though he had practiced this moment countless times in his mind. The complexity of the music held the audience's attention, drawing them deeper into the experience. Some were holding their breath, waiting to see how it would end, not wanting a single second to be lost. As the music swelled, the young man felt a surge of emotion. He had been nervous, unsure, and even a little doubtful when he first asked for a chance. But now he felt something he had never felt before. A sense of true expression. The piano wasn't just an instrument in his hands. It was an extension of himself. He could communicate feelings he couldn't put into words. Every chord, every pause, every gentle touch of the keys carried a piece of him, and the audience was feeling it with him. The room seemed to lean in closer. Conversations had stopped entirely, and all that remained was the sound of the piano and the connection it was creating. The young man played from his heart, letting the music dictate the flow instead of sticking strictly to notes he had memorized. It was a conversation between him and the piano, and between him and everyone listening. The energy in the room shifted, growing warmer, more alive, as if the music itself was wrapping around everyone present. He began to notice subtle reactions from the audience. A few people were softly tapping their fingers on the tables to the rhythm, caught up in the feeling. A young child's eyes were wide, staring at his hands as they moved across the keys. Others were smiling, quietly nodding, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music. The young man felt a quiet pride but also a deep gratitude. He had not only been given a chance, but he was now part of a shared experience, one that went beyond performance and into connection. As the melody reached its peak, the young man allowed himself to play with full emotion, letting the music swell and then soften again. He experimented with dynamics, shifting from loud, commanding chords to soft, delicate passages. Each change in volume, each pause, each subtle movement in the rhythm, told a story. He wasn't just playing, he was speaking through the piano. And for the first time, he realized that people could understand him in this way, could feel what he could not put into words. The music began to wind down, gradually slowing and softening. The young man's fingers lingered on the keys, allowing the final notes to echo through the room. He opened his eyes and looked up, noticing the audience's reactions. There were smiles, tears, quiet nods, and a sense of awe in the room that he hadn't expected. He had taken a hesitant beginning and turned it into something that mattered, something that had touched people. The sense of accomplishment warmed him from the inside out. The pianist, who had given him the chance, approached with a smile and a quiet nod. There was no need for words. The look in his eyes was full of acknowledgement and respect. The young man had done more than anyone expected, including himself. The brief hesitation and doubt that had clouded the start of the evening had melted away, replaced by a feeling of connection and triumph. He rose from the piano slowly, allowing the room to absorb the final silence. The audience remained still for a moment, as if savoring the last echoes of the music. Then, applause began to build, softly at first, then louder, more enthusiastic. People were clapping not just for the notes, but for the courage, the heart, and the honesty of the performance. The young man bowed slightly, overwhelmed by the response, feeling a mix of relief and joy. As the clapping continued, he stepped back, taking a moment to breathe. He realized that this night, this one opportunity, had become something far greater than he had imagined. It had been more than just a chance to play. It had been a moment to connect, to share, and to be seen. The emotions he had held inside for so long were now reflected back at him in the faces of the audience. He understood that music had the power to touch people in ways words could not, and that sharing it required both vulnerability and courage. People approached him afterward, expressing their admiration and surprise. They spoke softly, some thanking him, some complimenting the depth of feeling in his music. He listened, humbly accepting the praise, realizing that this experience was not just about performance, but about human connection. Each comment, each smile, reinforced the sense that he had made a meaningful impact, even in a brief moment. As the young man gathered his things and prepared to leave the stage, he looked back at the piano one last time. It was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between himself and everyone who had listened. He knew that this was only the beginning, that he had much to learn and many moments to come, but for now, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of having taken a chance, having been brave, and having shared his heart through music. This evening had proven that even a single opportunity, when approached with sincerity and courage, could create something unforgettable. The room still held a soft hum of excitement as the young man returned to the piano. He had felt a spark in part two, a connection with the audience that was more than just sound. Now, he wanted to explore it further, to let his music tell the story he had been carrying inside for so long. The audience had quieted, leaning forward slightly, their attention fixed entirely on him. The weight of their gaze made him nervous for a moment, but then he let it guide him, focusing on the keys beneath his fingers and the melody forming in his mind. He began to play, this time with more certainty. The notes flowed easily, as if they had been waiting inside him for the right moment to come alive. The room seemed to breathe with him, every subtle shift in tone creating a shared rhythm between performer and listeners. His hands moved across the keys gracefully, touching on soft, gentle notes before moving into stronger, more commanding chords. The audience was captivated, some sitting in stillness, some nodding ever so slightly to the rhythm, others with eyes closed, absorbing the music fully. The young man was aware that this was a delicate moment. He didn't want to overplay or force the music. He wanted it to grow naturally, to reflect his own emotions and to resonate with those who listened. He let the melody rise and fall, experimenting with the pace and intensity. A simple rhythm became more complex, each chord layered with emotion. He could feel the energy in the room changing, becoming warmer, more alive, almost like the music was weaving a quiet spell. Some people were starting to react visibly. A few listeners had tears glistening in their eyes, caught up in the feelings the music stirred. One person leaned closer to the edge of their chair, gripping the table lightly, drawn into the story being told through sound. The young man had not spoken a single word, but he felt the connection, sensed the empathy and admiration growing around him. He felt a quiet thrill at being able to share his inner world in such a powerful way. His confidence grew as he noticed the audience's reaction. The melody became more expressive, moving beyond simple harmonies to complex runs that required skill and precision. He had practiced this part in secret many times, yet it had always felt like a private thing. Now he was sharing it with strangers, and somehow that made it feel even more alive. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, every chord conveying emotion that words could never capture. The pianist who had given him this chance watched intently, impressed by the way the young man was evolving mid-performance. There was raw talent here, yes, but also intuition and courage. He had taken a hesitant beginning and transformed it into something extraordinary, showing not just skill but heart. The music was not just heard. It was felt, resonating deeply with the people present. Each person in the room was experiencing it in their own way, yet together they shared the magic of the moment. The young man's fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. He added subtle improvisations, letting intuition guide him, allowing the melody to twist and turn naturally. The audience was mesmerized, some leaning in, some holding their breath, all aware that they were witnessing something unique. The music had a life of its own now, moving beyond structure and notation, and becoming a reflection of the performer's soul. The young man realized that he was no longer just playing notes. He was communicating, sharing feelings that had been trapped inside for too long. As the performance progressed, he began to explore deeper emotions. The music shifted from light and playful tones to slower, more thoughtful passages that seemed to linger in the air. The audience responded with subtle gestures. A quiet sigh, a nod, a reflective expression. The young man could sense their engagement, and it inspired him to continue, to delve further into the range of expression the piano could offer. He felt as though the room itself was listening with him, shaping and bending with the melodies he created. There were moments when his hands stumbled briefly, and he almost faltered, but he adapted, turning each mistake into a delicate touch, blending it seamlessly into the piece. It was imperfect, yet perfect in its authenticity. The audience could feel it, and it made the experience all the more real. People often expect flawless performances, but what they were witnessing now was something far more human and powerful. The young man realized that vulnerability and courage were what made music truly magical. He moved into a section that was more intricate, challenging, and daring. His fingers glided across the keys with precision, the notes flowing faster yet controlled, creating layers of harmony and emotion. Some in the audience gasped softly, surprised by the skill emerging from someone they had only just met. The young man felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness, aware that this was the moment where he could show not just effort, but undeniable talent. He played as if the piano had become an extension of himself, every movement, every sound a reflection of his heart. The audience was completely captivated now. The small murmurs of conversation had ceased, replaced by complete focus. People were sitting forward, some with their eyes wide, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music. The energy in the room was tangible, a shared understanding that something special was happening. It was more than performance. It was an emotional journey that everyone was taking together. The young man felt a deep connection with every listener, as if the music had created an invisible thread linking them all. He allowed the music to reach a gentle, emotional climax. The notes became fuller, richer, yet still delicate. Every chord carried weight and meaning. He played with care, letting the piano resonate with every emotion he wanted to convey. The audience responded with visible signs of being moved. A quiet tear here, a soft smile there, expressions of awe and respect. The young man was aware of each reaction, though he didn't let it distract him. It fueled him, gave him strength, and inspired him to continue pouring himself into the performance. The young man then shifted to a softer, reflective passage. The intensity of the previous section gave way to a calm, contemplative tone. It was like a sigh after a storm, a moment to breathe and let the emotions settle. The audience was drawn in, feeling the contrast, feeling the depth of his expression. The music now felt alive in a new way, carrying both the weight of experience and the beauty of simplicity. It was a conversation, unspoken yet deeply understood. He noticed a few people leaning closer, captivated by the subtle changes, the nuances that made the piece personal and real. Some were swaying slightly to the rhythm, others were simply sitting still, letting the sound wash over them. The young man realized that he was not just performing, he was creating a shared emotional space. Each note, each chord, each pause mattered. It wasn't about impressing the audience with technical skill alone. It was about making them feel, and in that, he had succeeded. As he neared the end of this part of the performance, he allowed the music to slow, letting the final chords linger in the air. He felt a quiet satisfaction and relief, knowing that he had pushed himself further than before, that he had given his all. The audience remained silent for a moment, caught up in the final echoes of the music. Then, slowly, soft applause began, growing steadily as people expressed their appreciation. The young man bowed slightly, acknowledging the response, feeling a mix of humility and pride. The pianist approached him again, a look of admiration in his eyes. He didn't need to speak. The gesture was enough to show approval and recognition of the young man's talent. The audience continued to clap, some rising to their feet, some whispering words of praise to each other. The young man felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling of accomplishment that went beyond just performing. He had shared his emotions, touched the hearts of others, and taken the initial opportunity he had asked for and transformed it into something unforgettable. He stepped back from the piano slowly, allowing the applause to wash over him. He knew that this was more than a moment of success. It was a turning point, a realization that his passion and courage could lead to extraordinary experiences. The audience had seen not just a young man playing the piano, but a story being told, a journey being shared, a piece of someone's heart laid bare. He understood that music had the power to connect, to move, to heal, and that he had just begun to explore that power fully. The young man gathered himself, taking a moment to breathe and let the emotions settle. He looked around the room, noticing the smiles, the awe, the quiet admiration. This was no longer just about a performance. It was about human connection, about the magic that can happen when someone dares to step forward and share their gift. He realized that the audience had not only witnessed his talent, but they had also witnessed courage, vulnerability, and honesty. As he left the stage for a short break, the young man felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had discovered something within himself that he hadn't fully known before. The connection with the audience, the way they had responded to his music, gave him a quiet confidence. He understood that this opportunity, this single chance, had become a defining moment. It was a reminder that sometimes, all it takes is courage, passion, and sincerity to create something truly magical. And this magic, he realized, had only just begun. The young man sat back at the piano, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. He knew that this was the moment everyone had been waiting for, including himself. The music he had played so far had been a journey, but now it was time to reach the emotional climax he had imagined in his mind countless times. The audience was silent, watching him with anticipation, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. He placed his hands lightly on the keys and closed his eyes. He could feel his heartbeat in his chest, fast and steady, and he let it guide the rhythm of the opening notes. He began softly, almost as if testing the air, but there was a subtle intensity beneath each note, a promise that something remarkable was coming. The melody grew gradually, with each chord rising and falling like waves, building anticipation in the room. The young man could feel the energy of the audience feeding into his playing, each listener adding a quiet, invisible strength to his own determination. The music began to swell, growing in depth and complexity. His fingers moved with increasing confidence, weaving through the keys with precision and emotion. The room seemed to vibrate with every note, the sound filling every corner and touching every person present. The audience sat captivated, leaning forward, their eyes fixed on him. There was a sense of awe in the room, a feeling that they were witnessing something rare and special. Even the softest sounds seemed to carry weight and meaning, resonating deep inside. He allowed himself to play freely now, letting intuition guide him. Each chord told a story, Each note expressed a feeling too complex for words. He moved through the melody with passion, alternating between gentle, tender passages and bold, commanding ones. The music became an extension of his emotions, conveying both the struggles he had felt and the joy of finally being able to express them. It was as if the piano itself had become a voice for his soul. The audience was deeply engaged. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the depth and sincerity of the performance. Others were silent, listening intently, their expressions soft and thoughtful. There was a collective sense of wonder, a shared understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. The young man had created a connection, not just with the music, but with everyone present. Each person felt a part of the story he was telling, even without words. He continued to play, his fingers gliding over the keys with increasing skill and confidence. The melody became more intricate, with layers of harmony and counterpoints that added richness to the sound. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, every movement intentional. He had practiced for years in private, but now, performing in front of a real audience, he discovered a new level of expression. The music was no longer just technique. It was alive, breathing, and deeply human. The young man felt the emotions rising inside him, and he let them pour into the music. The melody became more dramatic, with sweeping gestures and bold chords. He allowed the piano to sing, to carry the weight of his feelings into the room. The audience responded instinctively, drawn into the ebb and flow of the music. They were not just listening, they were feeling. Their emotions mirrored his own, creating a shared moment of beauty and intensity. At one point, he paused briefly, letting a single note linger in the air. The silence that followed was powerful, filled with expectation and emotion. Then he resumed, building the music even higher, each note more expressive than the last. The audience could sense the climax approaching, and their anticipation added to the energy in the room. It was as if the entire space was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the music would reach its peak. The young man poured everything into the final section. The melody became soaring and expansive, the notes rich and full. His fingers moved with fluidity and grace, never missing a beat. The music carried both intensity and tenderness, creating a powerful emotional experience for everyone listening. The audience was completely absorbed, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, all feeling the depth of what he was expressing. The piano had become a bridge between him and everyone present, a channel for emotion that words could not capture. The climax of the piece arrived, and the young man let the music reach its fullest expression. He played with strength and delicacy at the same time, balancing power with sensitivity. The room seemed to pulse with the sound, every listener caught in the emotional current. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet reflection, all experiencing the magic of the performance. The young man felt a sense of triumph, knowing that he had achieved what he had set out to do, to share his heart and touch the hearts of others. As the final notes echoed and faded, the room was silent for a moment, letting the music settle in the air. The young man lifted his hands slowly from the keys, breathing heavily, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The audience remained still, processing what they had just heard. Then, one by one, they began to clap, softly at first, then louder, more enthusiastic. The sound of applause filled the room, a testament to the power of his performance and the emotions it had stirred. The pianist approached him with a look of admiration, nodding in acknowledgement. No words were needed. The expression said everything. The young man felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had not only performed, but had shared a part of himself that could not be taken away. He had transformed a single opportunity into something unforgettable, and the audience had witnessed it. People began to rise from their seats, offering smiles, quiet words of praise, and nods of respect. Some approached him, shaking his hand or patting his back, their expressions filled with genuine admiration. The young man felt humbled and grateful. He realized that the performance had been about more than just music. It had been about courage, vulnerability, and connection. He had taken a chance, and in doing so, he had created a moment of shared humanity. He stepped back from the piano, allowing the audience to continue their applause. The room was alive with energy, but there was also a sense of reverence, a quiet acknowledgement of the magic that had just occurred. The young man felt a calm satisfaction, knowing that he had given his all, that he had expressed what he could not say in words. The music had carried his story, and the audience had listened, understood, and felt it. As he gathered himself, he looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had listened so intently. He saw wonder, admiration, and joy in their expressions. It was a reminder that music could touch people in ways nothing else could, that a single performance, a single chance, could create something powerful and lasting. The young man felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that this experience was only the beginning of his journey. He had discovered the magic of sharing his talent, the thrill of connecting with others through music, and the courage it took to step into the unknown. The young man left the piano for a brief moment, breathing deeply and letting the applause wash over him. He knew that the evening had changed something inside him. He had taken a risk, embraced his passion, and shared it with the world. The audience had responded not just to his skill, but to his honesty, his heart, and his willingness to be vulnerable. He realized that this was the true power of music, the ability to connect, to move, and to create unforgettable moments. And in that moment, he understood that his journey had only just begun, and that the magic he had discovered would guide him forward, one note at a time. The applause was still echoing in the room when the young man finally stepped back from the piano. He had given everything he had to that performance, and the experience left him both exhausted and exhilarated. He looked around at the faces in the audience, seeing smiles, tears, and expressions of admiration. It was a moment he knew he would remember forever. The connection he had created with the audience was tangible, almost like a bridge of energy linking every person in the room to him and to the music he had shared. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had asked for one opportunity, and that one chance had transformed into something far greater than he could have imagined. The music had carried his emotions, his struggles, his hopes, and his dreams, and the audience had felt it, understood it, and responded with warmth and respect. For the first time, he realized the true power of courage, the willingness to step forward, to be vulnerable, and to share what was inside, even when the outcome was uncertain. People began to approach him, softly congratulating him, offering words of praise and encouragement. One person shook his hand, smiling warmly, saying that the performance had moved them in ways they couldn't describe. Another whispered that they had never experienced music so heartfelt and real. The young man listened, humbly accepting the admiration, feeling a quiet joy at being able to touch others through his talent. Each comment reinforced the lesson he had learned tonight, that sharing one's gift, even in a small way, could create a ripple of emotion and connection. The pianist who had allowed him the opportunity came forward, nodding with a proud expression. No words were necessary. The gesture spoke volumes. The young man understood that he had not only met expectations but exceeded them, turning a brief moment into something unforgettable. He felt a surge of gratitude toward the pianist, who had seen potential in him and taken a chance. That trust had made all the difference, and he promised himself to honor it by continuing to grow and share his music. He walked toward the edge of the stage, taking one last look at the piano that had carried him through this journey. Its polished keys glimmered softly in the light, and he felt a deep sense of respect for it. It had been his partner in expression, his voice when words were not enough. He realized that music was more than notes and rhythms. It was a language that could speak directly to the heart. And tonight, he had spoken eloquently, reaching everyone in the room. As the applause gradually subsided, a sense of calm settled over the space. The young man felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had done his best and that his performance had mattered. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, taken a risk, and allowed himself to be seen. The result had been magical, not because of flawless technique, but because of authenticity, courage, and heart. This was a lesson he would carry with him forever, a reminder that true magic happens when preparation meets opportunity and when honesty meets bravery. Some audience members stayed longer, whispering to one another about the beauty of what they had just experienced. Others approached the young man, asking him questions about his inspiration, his practice, and how he had found the courage to perform in such a public setting. He answered them humbly, sharing that he had always loved music, that it had been a private refuge for him, and that tonight had been his first chance to share it openly. His words were simple, yet they conveyed the depth of his passion and the significance of the moment. As he gathered his belongings, he reflected on the journey that had led him here. He thought about the long hours of practice, the private moments of self-doubt, and the determination that had kept him playing when no one else was listening. All of those moments had built up to this evening, culminating in a performance that had touched the hearts of many. He understood that talent alone was not enough. It was courage, persistence, and the willingness to take a chance that truly mattered. The young man noticed that some people were still lingering, hesitant to leave, as if they wanted to hold onto the magic a little longer. It was a feeling he himself had experienced moments earlier, the lingering joy and warmth that comes from connecting with others through a shared emotional experience. He realized that this was one of the most powerful aspects of music, its ability to create lasting memories, to forge bonds, and to communicate feelings that words cannot capture. As he stepped away from the stage and toward the exit, he felt a quiet pride in what he had accomplished. He had turned a single opportunity into a meaningful experience, both for himself and for the audience. It was a reminder that even small chances could lead to extraordinary outcomes if approached with sincerity, courage, and heart. He knew that this night would stay with him forever, a benchmark for what was possible when one dares to step forward and share their gift. Outside the venue, the cool evening air welcomed him, carrying with it the lingering energy of the performance. He took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the events of the night sink in. The applause, the smiles, the quiet admiration, all of it remained vivid in his mind. He felt a sense of clarity and purpose, knowing that this experience had not only revealed his talent to others, but had also revealed something important to himself. He had discovered that courage, passion, and authenticity were more powerful than fear, doubt, or hesitation. As he walked away, he thought about the future and the possibilities that lay ahead. The performance had given him confidence, a belief in himself that went beyond technical skill. He understood that opportunities might not always come easily, but when they did, embracing them wholeheartedly could lead to unexpected and transformative experiences. He vowed to continue playing, learning, and sharing his music, knowing that the magic he had felt tonight could be recreated again and again, as long as he remained true to himself. The young man's steps were lighter now, his spirit lifted by the realization that he had achieved something extraordinary. One simple request for a single opportunity had blossomed into a performance that touched hearts and created a moment of shared humanity. He felt gratitude for those who had witnessed it, for the pianist who had believed in him, and for the music itself, which had given him a voice and a means to express his inner world. As the night grew quieter, the young man carried with him the warmth of connection and the knowledge that magic could happen when courage met opportunity. He understood that this evening had been more than just a performance. It had been a lesson in bravery, a testament to the power of passion, and a reminder that even one chance could change a life. The experience had left him inspired, determined, and filled with a deep sense of purpose, knowing that he had made an impact and that the memory of this night would linger in both his heart and the hearts of those who had listened.